In light of Aaron Rodgers' season-ending Achilles injury just 4 snaps into the 2023 season, I've decided to make a list of the top 15 most impactful quarterback injuries in NFL history. Remember, impactful doesn't always have to be bad. Let's begin. Number 15, 2008 Tom Brady. Fresh off a season where they were one defensive stop from a 19-0 record, a motivated 2008 Patriots team looked poised and ready to finish the job this time. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you talk to, the revenge tour went up in flames in the first quarter of Week 1, when Kansas City's Bernard Pollard, American hero, blew out Tom Brady's knee. The Pats still went 11-5 and had an elite offense without Brady system, but missed the playoffs in a fluke occurrence. This was just a one-year setback in the Pats' dynasty years, however, as Brady would return from his injury and continue to make everybody's lives outside of New England worse for another decade. Number 14, 1993 Dan Marino. In 1992, Miami lost at home in the AFC Championship game, which was the closest they'd been to getting back to the Super Bowl in the Dan Marino era since 1985. Time was beginning to wind down on Marino's career, and with the addition of free agency, Miami was not shy about going out and adding talent, bringing in Keith Byers, Irving Fryer, and Mark Ingram from Marino to throw to. And things were looking great 5 weeks in, as Miami was 4-1 with Marino putting up his best efficiency numbers in years, all for it to crumble when Marino tore his Achilles in Week 5. Miami would get to 9-2 at one point before completely collapsing and finishing 9-7 and missing the playoffs. Marino returned in 94 and had a few more very good seasons, but 1993 felt like it could have been Marino's year to finally get back to the Super Bowl, if not for that injury. Number 13, 2023 Aaron Rodgers. Only time will tell exactly how much impact Rodgers going down 4 snaps into the 2023 season will have on the Jets, but it doesn't take a genius to realize that it'll be monstrously negative. With Rodgers, the Jets were legitimate Super Bowl contenders. Without him, they're just the same old Jets with a shitty offense holding back an excellent defense. Unless Zach Wilson sees some sort of unprecedented jump, one of the most hyped up seasons in Jets history will end up being just another rerun of years past. The best case scenario for Jets fans is this injury will only delay the arrival of a Super Bowl caliber team for 1 year, and Rodgers comes back in 2024 fully healthy and balls out. We'll see though. Number 12, 1978 Bert Jones. A good litmus test for how much somebody knows about the NFL is how familiar they are with the name Bert Jones. The Colts have had a history of great quarterbacks from Unitas to Peyton to Luck, but Jones gets forgotten about. He was sort of a John Elway before Elway, a fierce competitor with a rocket arm and could also scramble. The second overall pick in 1973's career had a bit of a slow start, but from 1975 to 1977 he was arguably the best quarterback in the NFL, winning 10+ games every year, including 1976 NFL MVP. Unfortunately for Jones in Baltimore, shoulder injuries began to plague him in 1978 at just 27 years old, and he was never the same player again. If not for those shoulder injuries, he would have likely become a Hall of Famer. Instead, the Colts would have to move across the country and wait almost 2 decades before finding their next star quarterback. Number 11, 1990 Phil Simms. In 1990, Phil Simms was putting up some of the best efficiency numbers of his career on a loaded Giants team, but in the 14th game of the year versus the Bills of all teams, he suffered a season-ending broken foot. The Giants' season appeared dead in the water, but the team rallied around longtime backup / porn stash haver Jeff Hostetler, who played the game manager role to perfection. With some luck along the way, shout out Roger Craig and Scott Norwood, the Giants managed to win Super Bowl 25. The ensuing years would be trying, however, as both Simms and Hostetler fought over the starting quarterback spot, leading to no success. Simms retired after 1993, while Hostetler would go on to prove himself as a solid quarterback for the Raiders. Do the Giants still win it all in 1990 if Simms never gets hurt? We will never know. But like I said, not all impact has to be bad. Number 10, 2017 Carson Wentz. The modern version of Simms Hostetler with several key differences. Simms was a decade into his career while Wentz was in his second year. Simms never came close to winning an MVP, while Wentz was the MVP frontrunner at the time that he got hurt. But the most important difference was that Simms had already won a ring and Super Bowl MVP in 1986, whereas Wentz had never won anything before. So when good old Big Dick Nick came in and replaced Wentz and led Philly on an improbable Super Bowl win with historically great playoff and Super Bowl numbers, it made things 1,000 times more awkward than before. Wentz never again approached his 2017 numbers and eventually lost all confidence before being shipped away to Indy after 2020. Foles, meanwhile, continued his journeyman career, making his improbable 2017 playoff run all the more mysterious and unexplainable. Does Philly still win the Super Bowl in 2017 if Wentz doesn't get hurt? I hate to say it, but my gut says no. Number 9, 1999 Trent Green. Similar qualities to the previous 2 entries on this list, but but with a major difference. Both Sims and Wentz got hurt at the end of the season for teams who already had great records. Green, on the other hand, was signed to be the quarterback of the future for St. Louis entering 1999, but as we all know, he famously tore his knee up in the preseason thanks to Rodney Harrison, giving little-known Kurt Warner the keys to the castle, which would eventually kick off the greatest show on turf era. Warner went on to win MVP, Super Bowl 34, and Super Bowl 34 MVP in just 1999 alone, before winning MVP again a few years later with another Super Bowl appearance, but we won't talk about that one. Warner fell off for a few years, leaving the Rams before regaining his composure and leading Arizona to a Super Bowl in 2008. He is now in the Hall of Fame. Green, on the other hand, went on to become a very good quarterback with the Chiefs on some offensively loaded, defensively challenged squads, but he never won a playoff game. Would the greatest show on turf have still won a ring in 1999 with Green instead of Warner? Would Green have become a Hall of Famer like Warner? I'm sure Green thinks about this a lot more than he lets on. Number 8, 1990 Joe Montana. No team has ever won 3 Super Bowls in a row, but the 1990 49ers came the closest, and if not for Joe Montana's infamous injury towards the end of the 1990 NFC Championship game versus the Giants, they might have done it. But Leonard Marshall's vicious hit on Montana did more than affect just the 1990 season. It effectively ended the Joe Montana era in San Francisco. At the time of the injury, Montana was a reigning 2-time MVP, a reigning 2-time Super Bowl champion, and the reigning Super Bowl MVP. He had cemented himself at that moment as the GOAT. He was the king of the league, and despite Steve Young waiting in the wings, the 49ers had no real reason to move on from him until this hit. San Fran was winning the game at the time of Montana's injury, but Roger Craig fumbled, which gave New York the ball with a chance to win, which they did, ending San Francisco's three-peat. Young would replace Montana, who missed all of 1991 with elbow problems, and go on to a Hall of Fame career of his own, even winning a Super Bowl in 1994. But to this very day, Montana believes he could have led San Fran to multiple Super Bowl wins from 1990 to 1994, instead of just one, if not for his injury. Considering how much better he was in the playoffs compared to Young, I don't doubt it. Number 7, 2012 Robert Griffin III. One of the saddest stories at the quarterback position in NFL history, RG3 as he was known, exploded onto the scene in the loaded rookie class of 2012, winning Rookie of the Year with incredible flair and efficiency. But most impressively, he was able to inject life and hope into the Redskins franchise for the first time since the early 90s, and the only time I can ever remember under Dan Snyder. Even before injuries robbed him of his career, there were doubts about his ability to read defenses as a pure drop-back passer, and that head coach Mike Shanahan's offense was covering up his flaws. Sure enough, at the end of the year, RG3 got hurt and missed a game, but was back in time to start Washington's playoff game. It started off great with 2 touchdown passes, but ended in a nightmare, as late in the game his knee finally gave out, doing the stanky leg on bad turf. He would start 13 games the next year, but with way worse efficiency. His injuries continued in 2014, and by 2015 he had completely lost his starting spot to draft mate Kirk Cousins, and he wasn't even active for most games. He then bounced around the league for several more teams with minimal success before retiring. Had he never gotten hurt or been held out of that playoff game as a rookie on a muddy field, Washington might have gotten a few more magical years out of him. Number 6, 1969 Greg Cook. If there's any player that can relate to RG3's career, it's Greg Cook. Cook was a freakish talent that arrived in Cincy in 1969, where he paired up with little-known receivers coach named Bill Walsh. The 5th overall pick in the draft immediately lived up to all the hype, and his efficiency numbers for his era were off the charts. He won Rookie of the Year and led the league in yards per attempt, adjusted yards per attempt, yards per completion, passer rating, net yards per attempt, and adjusted net yards per attempt. However, Cook was a victim of his time medically. He'd torn his rotator cuff early in the season and was able to play through it, but he then missed the next 3 seasons before making a short comeback attempt in 1973 that lasted 3 passes before he retired for good. Cook's injury helped involuntarily create the West Coast offense, as Cincy had to adapt to losing their signal caller by calling much shorter throws for weaker arm quarterbacks like Virgil Carter. Walsh took this philosophy with him to San Fran, and the West Coast offense would help launch the careers of Hall of Fame quarterbacks like Montana, Young, and Favre. As for Cook himself, had he never gotten hurt, there's no reason to believe Cincy couldn't have been consistent title contenders in the 1970s, while Cook himself would have a Hall of Fame bust in Canton right now. Number 5, 2011 Peyton Manning. In terms of straight-up impact, there is probably no player in NFL history more valuable than Peyton Manning. This was proven when he missed the entire 2011 season with a neck injury, as the Colts, who had won 10-plus games for 9 straight seasons at the time, collapsed to 2-14 with much of the same core players and were rewarded with the 1st overall pick. But Manning's neck injury impacted well beyond just that season. The Colts discarded Peyton for the generational Andrew Luck in the draft. Peyton would then go on to play 4 years in Denver, winning a Super Bowl, winning an MVP, re-breaking the single-season touchdown pass pass record and appearing in 2 Super Bowls total, showing he still had something left in the tank. If Peyton had never missed 2011, the Colts wouldn't have gotten Luck, and maybe they would be able to squeeze out another ring of the Peyton era. Getting Luck, thanks to Peyton's injury, appeared to allow the Colts to be set up at quarterback for the next 15 years. But as the next entry shows, that didn't quite go as planned. Number 4, 2019 Andrew Luck. Luck leaves a complicated NFL legacy. If you watched him play, you knew he was very good, even if his stats didn't always say so. He didn't miss a single game his first 3 years, leading Indy to the playoffs all 3 years, including the conference championship game to Deflategate in 2014. He also led the NFL in touchdown passes in 2014 at just 25 years old. He was on pace to become a Hall of Famer just like everybody expected. Then the injuries started to hit in 2015, a year in which he played horribly when on the field and also missed 9 games. He returned to play 15 games in 2016 while throwing for 4,200 yards and 31 touchdowns, but then he missed the entire 2017 season. He came back in 2018 to start all 16 games while throwing for 4,600 yards and 39 touchdowns. He was smack dab in his prime and back onto his Hall of Fame trajectory, but entering 2019 training camp, injuries started to pop up again for him. Tired of constant rehab and having his joy for the game taken out of him, Luck famously retired out of nowhere in August 2019, just before the season and just before his 30th birthday. Luck's decision set the Colts franchise back years, going from a perennial playoff team to a joke, missing the playoffs 3 of the last 4 years with 0 playoff wins. Only recently has the team taken a swing at the QB position in the first round, hoping to build for the future after a couple stopgaps. With a healthy and prime Andrew Luck, as well as the decline of the Pats, the Colts would be right up there with the Chiefs, Bengals, and Bills right now as AFC contenders. Instead, they're pretty much irrelevant. It still feels like he should be playing. Number 3, 2005 Drew Brees. It's hard to believe now, but Drew Brees was not always the respected Super Bowl champion, Super Bowl MVP, first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback he became with New Orleans. In fact, there was a time in the early 2000s in San Diego that people even wondered if he was good. There's a reason the Chargers brought in Phillip Rivers to be their quarterback of the future in 2004. But Brees improved noticeably in 04 and 05, and it looked as though he would be with the Chargers for at least a few more seasons following 2005, until the final week of the 05 season when he suffered a torn rotator cuff, leading questions as to whether he'd even play again. Brees' injuries certainly cast a very wide web. It began the Rivers era in San Diego, where he became one of the best statistical quarterbacks ever and a borderline Hall of Famer. It began the Brees era in New Orleans, which turned Brees into a Hall of Fame quarterback, Sean Payton into a potential Hall of Fame head coach, and helped start the Nick Saban era at Alabama. That's right, the Dolphins front office was not willing to pay Brees heading into 2006 when Saban was the head coach there. If Brees had chosen Miami over New Orleans, Saban never leaves after 2006 and never wins 6 national championships at Alabama to become the best college football coach of all time. Instead, perhaps, with Saban's defensive genius and Brees at the helm offensively, the Dolphins provide Belichick and Brady with the worthy AFC East rival they never got in 2 decades. Number 2, 1992 Don Machakowski, the Wally Pipp of the NFL. The Magic Man had his moment in the sun in 1989 when he led a bunch of comebacks to take the Packers to a 10-6 record while leading the league in passing yards and finishing second in MVP voting. The next 2 years, though, he did next to nothing besides get hurt. And once he got hurt again early in the 1992 season under new head coach Mike Holmgren, it paved the way for famous welfare expert Brett Favre to take over at quarterback. The rest is history. Favre went on to become one of the best quarterbacks ever and started every game for the Packers until the start of the 2008 season, where another future Hall of Fame quarterback took over for him, kicking off 30 years of consistent winning in Green Bay, although many would say they underachieved with just 2 rings in that span. Anyway, if Machakowski had never gotten hurt and been able to recapture the magic of his 1989 season, maybe nobody knows who Brett Favre is right now. And finally, the number 1 most impactful quarterback injury in NFL history, 2001 Drew Bledsoe. Drew Bledsoe getting hurt early in the 2001 season jump-started the greatest dynasty in NFL history. It opened the door for Tom Brady to begin his career of unprecedented luck, winning, accolades, and devil magic, and it helped Bill Belichick go from a bum to the greatest head coach in NFL history. No singular injury, quarterback or otherwise, has had anywhere close to the same amount of impact on the history of the sport. Hell, you could argue no player injury in any sport, period, has had as much impact as this one. The mostly negative effects from Bledsoe's injury lasted over 20 years. It was the happiest accident possible for Patriots fans and the worst possible outcome for everybody else. There's no question the world would be a better place right now if Bledsoe never got hurt and Brady ended up fading into the background as a career backup, but we just can't have nice things, now can we, Mo Lewis? You fucking asshole. Bledsoe had a very respectable career in his own right, but no matter what he does, he will always be known as the guy who got cucked by Tom Brady. And And Tony Romo, too, for that matter. At least he has a ring to show for it, I guess. Something a lot of you hoes can't say.